right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Carly Endries. I'm the Senior Project Coordinator for the North Dakota Brain Injury Network. We try to hold these webinars every other Wednesday as often as we have speakers and topics. So if you know of anyone that would want to speak or a topic that you would like us to speak on or find a speaker for, let me know. Always willing to do that, reach out and ask. So we're excited to have Mike with us today. I see a lot of credentials doing what I do, but I think you take the cake, Mike, with all those letters behind your name. So impressive. So I will let you introduce yourself so I don't try to attempt to explain all of that. So we're excited to have you though, and a great topic. So I'll let you take it away.
Carly, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll be happy to take it away, but first I want to thank you for your coordination and invitation. Looking forward to being here with everyone, and I want to invite everyone's interaction both during my presentation. I'll watch the Q&A, but also I'll leave time afterward as well. Recognizing that we've got persons on here that are survivors of brain injury as well as providers, I'm going to try to speak bi-directionally today and also provide content that will be valuable to all. So the topic today, maximizing brain performance and neuroplasticity, intends to discover what occurs physiologically, intimately in the brain, and how that can be manipulated to accelerate recovery in the acute stages, but also continue to maximize recovery in the more persistent cases, speaking directly toward neuroplasticity, the dynamic re-networking and let's just say mapping of the brain for all forms of learning and recovery in life. Just a very, very brief note on me, so you have a background of the person that's working with you here. So I've been a physical therapist since 1991, board certified as a neurologic specialist since 1995. I've worked basically the entirety of the continuum of care as a practice owner, provider, researcher, academician, and everything. So I remain a practicing clinician in inpatient rehab now, and also occasionally in outpatient rehab, but I also lead research projects and lecture throughout the world. Should you have a question that you're not able to ask or don't feel that you have fully formulated, you can certainly use my email address. I've left my email at the bottom of this page, and then follow me on social media should you choose for that is also down here. And then the book that I'll make very, very brief reference to that talks about wellness and health span, both in injury and non-injured situations. The Brain That Chooses Itself is down here as well. So the roadmap of what we're going to cover today, we're going to start first in understanding the facts about the brain, debunk a few things that you might have held as misconceptions about the brain. After that, we're going to talk specifically about the physiology that I mentioned after brain injury, and we're going to make that very clinically applicable and real life relevant as we move directly into how to utilize that information about what happens in the injury to be able to maximize rehabilitative experiences in the clinic and as well in life. And then at that point, we'll start to see how an individual might be able to personalize their own recovery and how providers can help to personalize recovery for individuals to maximize their neuroplasticity. And then we'll wrap up in about 40 to 45 minutes from right now with discussion and questions, etc. So let's start off and talk about exactly what I promised, brain facts with no myths allowed. All right, so if you look at the brain, the adult human brain has something in the neighborhood of 83 billion neurons. And here's the shocking part about that, because that number is already a little bit unwieldy and hard to put our arms around. But every one of those neurons can make up to 5,000, and in some of the cases, a neuron can make upwards of 100,000 connections. Now, almost every neuron will make two connections, but many of them will make in the orders of tens of thousands, if not 100,000 connections. So if you can imagine 83 billion multiplied by just on average 20,000, you're really looking at numbers that we have a hard time reaching. But why is this relevant is what you want to ask yourself. Well, there's a lot of different relevant connections and important connections that can be injured with a concussion or any forms of the severities of brain injury. But it also is an opportunity for neuroplasticity in terms of the viable re-networking that can be done within this tight space. So there are many connections and many opportunities for rewiring. And the question then you must be asking yourself is, of these numbers, the primary relevance of the entire discussion is, how do you make more connections? Let's take just a moment to understand that we don't have great science about how to make more neurons, but we do have impeccable science about how to make more connections. All right, so let's advance from there and let's start talking about this term neuroplasticity. And one scientific way to define it is listed for you here: a dynamic capacity of the brain to reorganize in response to experience. So please keep in mind that all forms of learning, someone's name, the route to get home, how to ride a bicycle, how to button a shirt, what your phone number is, all forms of learning, fact-based learning, event-based learning, what did I eat for breakfast, where did we go on vacation, and movement-based learning, all three of those forms of learning, those are all three different forms of memories as well. All of them require neuroplasticity. And the main understanding that we have of all the things that we could say about neuroplasticity is that we can reinforce current pathways, create new connections that offer redundancy. You cover this information here, but it's also back covered in another connection across the brain. I'm going to speak to that, but you can also develop new pathways. So you can make that phone number that you're having a difficult time remembering, you can make it easier to remember by making new pathways, by reinforcing its pathway and making it easier to recall, or by creating a parallel pathway. Neuroplasticity, just new connections, gives us the opportunities in all of those. Now, I want to speak to neurogenesis, which I mentioned that I would, and that is new neurons. And I told you the science behind creating new neurons is not nearly as prolific and accurate and well understood as making new connections. So neurogenesis, which for many hundreds of years was thought to be impossible after we crossed over into adulthood, does occur throughout the human brain and throughout our lives. Neurogenesis only occurs, as far as we know now, in our main memory centers for facts and for events. So we call that our explicit memory centers. Okay, and so those are explicit. and that means things that can be explained. So that is our storage centers for facts, for trivia, and for events. You might well know this as a very horse-shaped or seahorse-shaped segment in the brain known as the hippocampus. Hippo is the root word, the Latin root word for horse-like. And so the hippocampus is the only area we know that we get neurogenesis continuing. I'm going to spare you the story about how we learned that, but I'm willing to field a question on that at the end today if you're interested to find out how we first learned that throughout life we continue to grow new nerve cells in the hippocampus. Now, we do know that higher intensity exertion, whether that come in the form of exercise or just physical activity, that helps to promote the fertilizers that can help both of these processes, and that is neuroplasticity as well as neurogenesis. Our capacities in neurogenesis can be drawn back to some degree. This is imperfect science by those features that you see down here below. Poor or lack of sleep, a non-stimulating environment, something that causes a degree of boredom or causes a degree of fear, or is an impoverished environment with very few stimuli. You think about the experiments that you've heard about for rats that have plenty of food and light and social interaction and treadmills to run on, and a day and night cycle that is a fully funded environment. And then the other rats that they're compared to have an impoverished environment with full darkness, no exercise, food scarcity, etc. All of those things influence the dynamics of the health attributes of our brain. So age, stress, exercise or physical activity, nutrition, sleep, and environment all influence neurogenesis. The same can be said for neuroplasticity. So section one, out of the way, that's all the big physiology and big brain facts that we want to talk about. Now we want to move into the brain injury specifics about what happens. A brief physiology there tied to what we can do to leverage this information for most successful recovery. All right. So in a brain injury, we have a few things that are predictable, no matter whether we're talking about a mild brain injury that most often now is recognized as a concussion, which would not have an evidenced or an imageable injury, but in fact also all the way into severe forms of brain injury. All of these temporary things happen in all of those. I'm going to let you look at those 4 bullet points because I believe we have a question in the queue, and let's see. Here we go. Okay, good. It looks like we've got, 2 new questions here. Do I have them? No, I think we've got everything taken care of there. Okay, so that was just Carly posted some information. Thank you, Carly, for posting that. I'm just now seeing those temporary things that occur in a brain injury: loss of blood flow locally, nerves that are unable to perform their typical functions because they're metabolically inhibited. And part of that is due to glucose. Part of it is due to neurotransmitters that are locally in abundance that are shocking the area. Part of it's due to metabolites and also we'll just say sodium, potassium elements, and in fact, in addition to that, calcium channels. So you have metabolites, blood flow, neurotransmitters, and blood glucose that are all influencing the relative patency, functionability of these nerves. Short term, you can think about everything in a temporary state of shock because all of the resources are on low order. And all of those four elements can also be considered throughout the entire scope of severities of injuries. The one thing that we have to understand that would not be the case in a concussion would be here trauma to arteries or veins that include blood escaping or pooling and being toxic to the cells. That'd be the one thing that we shouldn't see in a concussion. Okay. Now, respectfully, I do understand that some individuals in attendance here today have endured or are survivors of a brain injury. I want to be very, very respectful and considerate because we're talking about brains in general. So I don't want you to think that what we're talking about here labels anything that would be permanent in your situation. And obviously, I would not have a medical relationship with you here. I am happy to attempt to field questions for you, but I don't want you to feel that any of the things that we're talking about describe your permanence of your condition. These should be temporary and recoverable. The neurometabolic cascade image that I've shared with you here is something that we have to understand is largely an average of what occurs. It describes the shock that I just went through and is not only largely recoverable, but also offers some opportunities for things we can do to expedite healing. All right, you'll recall what I mentioned last slide. We have our metabolites or elements, however you like to refer to them. Potassium and calcium here. You'll notice that they both spike up and then they come back down on the order of hours to days after injury. Sodium could be put on here as well, but the chart is already, or figure is already busy enough. Glutamate, which is a neurotransmitter, spikes up and then comes back down. That inhibits or shocks nerve cells as well. In addition, inflammation comes up and takes some time, 5, 6, 7 days to play out. Inflammation will be directly tied to blood flow. So if our blood flow is suppressed, our ability to clear out will also be blunted. This is where we have one of the greatest action points. And I'm going to just skip over and just briefly gloss the fact that glucose goes up and then stays down. And that's within the intimate, let's just say, area of the brain, available energy sources are also suppressed. You'll notice that follows blood flow as well. So this all comes together and says, what are the opportunities for us to expedite recovery within this first 7 to 10 days, but also promote recovery after 7 to 10 days? And it is in fact because of these dynamics in specific that the most recent world consensus on concussion, which also speaks to the more severe forms of brain injury, revised their standards to suggest that within the first 24 to 48 hours, that people engage in light exercise. Why? So that we could promote blood flow coming back up to the brain, restoring glucose, clearing inflammation, and removing this state of shock. Light exercise in the form of walking, stationary bicycling, semi-recumbent elliptical pedaling, or otherwise. Light exercise, which at one point was thought should never take place in the first 5 to 7 days after brain injury, is now, in fact, considered to be a staple of the protocol. These are, in fact, the physiologic reasons why. All right, so now we take a moment to think, okay, why could my brain injury be different from a friend of mine who's also on this webinar, or a relative of mine, or someone else I know from their brain injury experience? Here's where we want to begin to individualize the care, which is a very important consideration for us. Brain injuries can be different based on mechanism of injury, whiplash, impact, blunt instrument, etc. And I'll resist going any further to be sensitive to individuals' experiences. Severity, so that is acceleration, degree of intimate brain injury, blood flow disrupted, etc. And finally, brain injuries are different based on location and anatomy. Now, because no two brains are identical based on their experiences, even if someone was injured with the same mechanism, same severity, and same location, their brain injury experience should be slightly different than another equally matched person. What does that turn into? What does that mean? Well, if you look at this list, this spells the acronym COACH CV. And you think about the resume of a coach or a coach CV, what you're actually looking at here are all of the 7 main subtypes, or an equal word, phenotypes of brain injury that help us to guide our rehabilitation so that it's individualized for every person. So you can begin to see yourselves potentially here, as you would know that you would have cognitive impairments or difficulty focusing vision and tracking. Affective, meaning your personality, your ability to regulate your emotions. Perhaps you have cervical spine or neck issues, pain, stiffness, or inability to detect where your head is. Perhaps you're having or experiencing headaches throughout the entire head or through different regions. Perhaps you're experiencing difficulty exerting yourself and not experiencing nausea, dizziness, or headaches from exertion. That would be cardiovascular. Or potentially you're experiencing dizziness, imbalance, or potentially even vertigo, 3 separate things. No one person needs to just have one of these phenotypes. And while it would be rare for a person to have all 7 of them, this is what begins to differentiate and personalize our care. So for those of you that are survivors, look at this list, attempt to correctly identify what your experience is so that you can inform your medical care team. For those of you that are providers, make certain that your early interactions with every person that has endured a brain injury is directed at an effort to be very specific about their experience, their phenotype, and then our treatment is directed at these presentations. So now we're going to take a majority of the rest of the time to talk about neuroplasticity and the science of recovery, now that we've understood what happens and what different brain injuries may look like, the presentation of persons with, so that we can maximize recovery. All right, so we're looking at all four of these things in this section. How do we get nerve cell function to return from shock? How do we restore or create new connections, neuroplasticity? And finally, how do we improve tolerance for different environments or sensations or experiences that are currently not tolerable to us? Movement, sound, light would be among the top three. All right, so recalling what happens in a brain injury, and now we're inserting what happens in recovery from a brain injury. So we want to help this individual medically stabilize intracranial pressure and swelling. Largely, that is done on a medical standpoint. To some degree, medications, positioning, body temperature, hydration, and sometimes surgery to remove a flap. Those are our best mechanisms to medically stabilize and regulate intracranium or intracranial pressure and the effects of swelling. We don't like swelling because that, in fact, tends to occupy part of the finite area within the skull, and the brain gets pushed around. Remember, we want to clear inflammation, i.e., swelling. Also, in restoring brain function and reversing damage, we want to restore blood flow. But you're already informed about this, and so you already know one of our best attributes for people that are recovering and can tolerate it is any form of light physical activity. Sometimes that's changing positions, getting the head upright, even if they're passively being stabilized in bed. Ideally, we would get light aerobic exercise, commanding and demanding some extra blood flow up to the brain. Remember, clear inflammation, restore blood glucose, restore metabolites and elements, and get overall blood flow up. In addition, now we come into the realms of neuroplasticity. We want to begin to introduce a stimulus that can cause the individual to be more wakeful, to begin to orient themselves, to begin to control their body and balance, to be coordinated, agile, and accurate as far as dexterity, and to communicate their own needs, receiving information from the world visually, auditorily, and somatosensorily, or by movement and touch in the body. So, in the efforts to introduce stimulus, to introduce restoration, we may be giving individuals an opportunity to begin to become re-familiarized with sensations that are currently not tolerable. And as you see here, the primary approach here is known as habituation. Light and sound, exertion, potentially even scents, smells, those would be the top sensory stimuli that a person would need to gradually be exposed to so that their brain becomes familiar with and tolerant of again. Along the way, in this recovery from brain injury, people need a balance of being successful and also engaging in activities that are a little bit too hard for me so that there's a stimulus for the brain to do better. So it is acceptable and scientifically appropriate to trigger a little bit of difficulty with light tolerance for example, movement tolerance, for example, and just do enough that the brain experiences that, come away from it, and then after a period of time, go back to that again. That exposure-based therapy is largely under the umbrella known as habituation or graded exposure. However, you, as a person recovering from brain injury, need to be able to personalize the dosage of how intense, how long, how frequent, and how much am I being exposed. So your preferred dosage for any one of these needs to be part of the equation that your team is following for how to help me habituate, improve my tolerance, so that I don't have to wear sunglasses or a baseball cap, or artificial lights have to be turned off, or I can only go out in certain times of the day. So, in all of those things, light tolerance, body motion tolerance, it is in fact your opinion and your expression of how well you're tolerating that indicates the therapeutic dosage that neuroplasticity will see a stimulus and make a new connection and see the hopeful restoration of function. So when we begin to look at that personalized recovery of brain injury, restore blood flow, stabilize pressure, begin to introduce stimuli, have some successes and just enough failures, that balance gets placed into your specific subtype or presentation, otherwise known as phenotype, of brain injury in all of those 7 different presentations: the cognitive, the ocular or oculomotor, the affect. Those are the 3 here, just relisting them for your learning opportunity. Or the other and final 4 out of those 7: cervical, headaches, cardiovascular, and vestibular. Now, in each of those 7, in these 2 slides, I've given you a little bit more of a summary of what is optimally performed to rehabilitate this specific presentation. Now, you likely have the handouts for this. If you don't, I can send them directly to you, or Carly can as well. All right, moving forward, let's recognize that some of you on the call are either helping people with persistent symptoms from brain injury, or you yourself have experienced a brain injury that's months and years ago. So now let's be a little bit more specific about persistent symptoms more than 3 months ago. And first, I'm going to see what we have here in chat.
Sorry, Mike, it's just me again.
Okay, perfect. No problem, and thank you.
Yes.
So in persistent symptoms, you have these main themes that help the body and the brain interact so that one can help the other bidirectionally. So to improve cognitive fitness, we have 4 different subtypes of attention. I'm not going to belabor this point, but this would be another opportunity for us to discuss potentially at the end. You have divided attention, you have selected attention. So divided attention is dual tasking. Selected attention is my ability to filter or ignore irrelevant things. I also have task switching, which is different than dual tasking. We can talk about that more. And then finally, we also have our sustained attention. How long can I hold attention? And in fact, you can improve cognitive fitness by working on endurance in your body. Believe it or not, having a more prolonged cardiovascular, even a level 2, I'm feeling barely breathless with this, will in fact stimulate more of your attention areas. And we can go through all the specifics on each of these, but please understand our persistent symptoms also include these approaches for reweighting sensations, for tolerating sensations that have not been tolerant to us. And that same exact approach that I talked about in the acute phase of exposure-based therapy has no time out to it, no time limit to it. That's always viable to us to gradually and systematically introduce ourselves or expose ourselves to conditions and stimuli that had been previously difficult. In addition, from especially the headache and cervical presentation, we want to reduce pain. That can include manual therapy at the head and neck or otherwise, may even include neck-specific strengthening. We also want to improve physical endurance for the purposes of blood flow and for the purposes of becoming tolerant to being exerted, improving heart rate variability, which is something we can talk about at the end, self-regulation, the affect as well, and tolerance to distractions. All of these are basically, again, summarize the approach of let's expose someone to a level of difficulty that is occasionally including too difficult and errorful, but more frequently incurring some degree of success. Let's expose them and let's include them in the dosage. Now, I've seen a few questions come up or more discussion in the chat. I'm going to pop down to that real quick. We've got
Right, I'll
those.
interrupt you if we need to. It's just me putting links to
Okay,
all of our tip sheets that have guidance around like managing attention, memory, processing.
perfect.
So just,
You are
yeah.
complementing the presentation in the background. So I'll wait for you to interrupt me with an actual question. Then next time I always want to be
No, I
responsive and
get that.
attentive.
I get that. Yes, I will interrupt if needed.
So, as a survivor of brain injury, one thing that you might consider is the opportunity to advocate for yourself if, in fact, any one of these 8 bullet points seem to resonate with you. So you may say, I need structure. I need to know exactly what exercises. I need to know we're only going to be in sunlight for 2 minutes. And you give and take from your therapist this notion that I benefit best when I have structure and I know what's coming. Some people would prefer from that. Others would feel that they're bombarded by too much information. Just do what you need to do. I don't want to know what's coming up next. And I don't want to hear about all the different things we're going to do for the next 60 minutes. Some persons recovering want to see the evidence. Other people don't want to hear the science. They don't want to waste time talking. And that would be their perception that talking about the evidence and the why would not be valuable to them. Other individuals would say, tell me a case where you tried this and it worked for someone whose brain injury was like mine. We call that vicarious experiences. And if that would help you, make sure you communicate that to your care team as well. If you feel like you're not being heard enough, your choices, your preferences, and your beliefs, make certain that you are looking at number 4 there. Perhaps you benefit from the nature of being measured. How was I doing with this 2 weeks ago? Perhaps you don't like the pressure of being remeasured. We need to know that about you as well. Sometimes people feel a certain degree of success when they are in a playful or a flow state, rather than feeling like they're concentrating very hard to recover movement or dexterity or agility in their hands, that you would rather be more playful. We need to know that about you. Perhaps you have specific preferences for music that would help you engage in therapy. And finally, perhaps you need to feel very productive and feel like you're accomplishing something. And so you want to stay focused on accomplishing a task rather than improving a skill. So all of those 8 are different ways that we can individualize care for you. Here are a few more that should be given consideration as well. These different visuals or infographics are ways that you can communicate with your therapist that that balance task felt just right for me. That dual task or cognitive task, let's go back to that, sorry. Sometimes when I use that pen, it calls that dual task or cognitive task needs to be a little bit harder for my liking, or it was just hard enough. So you rate that. Or potentially, here's how I felt after we exposed to light or sound or movement, and you give your therapist a precise rating of how you felt. It's not only these ratings that help both of us, but in fact, what your preferences are for the next task. Okay, here's how that felt. That's one thing. We always want to know that. But what therapists are not getting from survivors often enough is, okay, I understand that's how you felt. Now, what do you prefer the next time we try this task? More light, longer. I think I can handle a little bit more difficult dual tasking, etc. So we not only need to know how you felt about it, but what your preference is for the next experience. So task-specific training is one approach that is largely utilized in rehabilitation so that the neuroplasticity is organized around accomplishing a task such as walking without someone next to me, dressing myself while sitting at the edge of a bed, and it's high enough that I have my feet off of the floor. Attempting to eat and safely swallow a new texture. Task-specific training helps the brain organize around new connections that you will likely also experience in real world. This is different than an internal body focus. Can you move your legs straight ahead? Can you keep your hands still? Can you move your eyes quickly and directly over to that word? We want to, as your therapy progresses, have less of a body part focus and more of a task that I accomplished focus. That appears to be more healthy psychologically, motivationally, from an attention standpoint, from a fertilize the brain with dopamine standpoint. All of those things help to construct better neural networks in relearning than being very attentive to a body part. So we're going to talk just a moment as we begin to wrap up here just a little bit on dual tasking because I made some references to that. It is healthy for some people and most people at some point in their recovery to engage in divided attention or dual tasking. Our attention center, largely and simplistically located here, and our procedural memory centers where we store information about movements that we know extremely well, located here. How do I sign my name, button this shirt? How do I walk, brush my teeth, swallow, ride a bike, etc.? Largely, movements that we have done tens of thousands of times and that we can do without thinking are stored here. We, in fact, want a crosstalk between these two areas of the brain, and we can conduct that by dividing attention. When your attention center is occupied on remembering this list of all the dogs that you've owned, your attention center can't be focused on the movements that you're trying to conduct right now, which is healthy because then the very brain centers that used to operate those automatic movements are now left to their own design and get the opportunity to focus on those movements again. We don't want your attention center focused on your hand. We want that part of your brain that does it automatically to take control again. And if your attention center is not occupied, it will try to pay attention and regulate the task itself. So this is relevant for work, for return to sport, for managing children in the back seat while you're driving, for organizing your day and grocery shopping. And obviously, that's not what's occurring here. Divided attention is two activities, dual tasking. When you have heard in your life that multitasking is unhealthy, that is in fact correct. We don't learn information better by dividing our attention 3 or more different directions. We can learn movements and information better by simply dividing in 2 directions. Dual tasking is 2, multitasking is 3 or more. A world that feels too busy to you needs to be communicated to your therapist. So finally, let's keep in mind that all of our efforts in neuroplasticity are to personalize and maximize your rehabilitation experience. That means I need to tell you about people that have been successful, let you see other people like you that are working on similar activities, let you experience some unexpected success through the measurements that we've got, and let you see that further gains are likely possible. You're not done improving, and let you be surrounded by an environment that feels like a healthy, healing environment. If we go back to that enriched environment that we talked about with the rat and mice experiments, all of those cause you to have greater belief that this is the right place for you to recover and helps your brain feel optimistic. So wins become larger after you have occasional errors. I'm surprised I did that well with this. It's more healthy to have a stimulating neuroplastic experience in rehabilitation that does not include winning every time. We want to have some near misses. We want to have some challenge, and we want to have some unexpected successes, which this slide plays out. That's where I want to wrap up at 45 minutes. Give all of you an opportunity to think about what you've heard, ask questions of me. And if you don't feel compelled to ask questions now, remember you can merely contact me here and I'll be very responsive to you. So let's take time to discuss what so far. If in fact you are viewing this in recording, please also feel invited to send me an email of your questions accordingly. All right, so I'm going to
I do have
stop my
one in the,
screen sharing.
okay, we do
Go
have a
ahead.
question in the chat and it's a great one. I think it's appropriate. Yeah. So what is your next step when exposure to tasks are not yielding results or are not being followed through with by the individual you are working with?
First thing I want to do is I want to find out what this individual thinks is healthiest for them. It is possible that my dosage of exposure has been an overdosage, and this individual thinks it's an overdosage, and so that their belief structure is never going to allow for success because they're the experts in themselves, and we essentially have what's known as a nocebo. This isn't going to work for me. You're pushing me too hard. This is too long of a stimulus of light for me. And we don't make success because the therapist is not listening to the patient. So that's step number one is the dosage needs to be considerate of what the person prefers and has belief in. That would be my first step. And in fact, I'm sorry. Yeah, see, I think I got Marissa's question there. If they're not being followed through, then I probably need to do the same thing, because now I need to find out what is this individual's belief structure that's causing them to say, I don't need to do that. That's not going to be helpful for me. So those are the main things, as I go back to the person first and make certain that I have a collaborative experience built. Now, that may involve me saying, vicarious experiences. This is why I'm doing this. These are people like you that have improved because of that. Or it may be, this is the research. This is exactly why we're doing this. But first, I need to go back and do some listening. I want to take Rosette's question now. How would you modify these strategies if a patient has a second brain injury? Okay, if it's a second brain injury within 5 days, a second impact syndrome, we still need the light movement, but we do not want intensity or errors to occur necessarily here if their second brain injury has occurred within 5 days. Okay, they return back to sport. We need to make sure just light movement, nominal exposure to environmental and stimuli stressors, plenty of hydration, maximizing nutrition, all of those things. It doesn't mean a dark room is beneficial, but light amounts of environmental stimulation, light, sound, noise. We used to think that dark rooms and no screens, no artificial light, no noise was the rule, and that's not the case. Small amounts of it so a person doesn't experience a rebound effect. The other thing to say about a second brain injury is that the cerebral blood flow is suppressed from the first injury and then further suppressed from a second. So light activity becomes the number one thing. Marina says, so is it possible for a patient to request too low of a dosage that may not yield results? Absolutely, I'll address that. How would you work with this type of patient to ensure they're getting enough of a therapeutic dosage? One of the easiest things to do in this situation, Marina, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, would in fact be through motivational interviewing. So we measured you 2 weeks ago and adjusted our care so that the volume of your home exercise and your in-clinic time felt healthier for you. Let's measure you now to see how much you've improved as compared to 2 weeks ago, so that we can determine if the dosage that you're receiving is enough to promote recovery. Here's what your measurement was. Here's what your measurements are. I want you to look at these and tell me what you see from the difference in these measurements. Now, through motivational interviewing, what perceptions or what opinion do you develop when you see that you are making good gains in strength and making good gains in balance, but your tolerance to light has not improved much? How does that make you feel, and what does that cause you to be curious about? And so that type of motivational interviewing is giving people the empowered opportunity to say, I want you to look at the results and tell me what you think we should do. That's one of the best strategies right there, to implement motivational interviewing so that an individual can see that their choice of lowering the stimulus was respected. However, it's not informing or begetting significant improvements. What would you like to do about that? Okay, I'm going to look down for more questions. Are there any persons? Oh, here we go. Here's another one. Is there anyone that's asked a question that does not feel that I answered it completely, that would like to reiterate anything, I'm happy to take that. And then we'll at least take one more question from Marissa. When talking about heart rate variability, are there considerations we should take when working with an individual with POTS? Marissa, this is an exceptional question, as all of the others have been, but the science on this is not perfect. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, is a condition that we know imperfectly as yet. We have just recently learned that the history of a concussion can make it more likely that a person presents with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. For those of you that are not familiar with that, basically, and I'm being reductive and oversimplified in this, the individual's heart rate stays elevated when the blood pressure is dropping. And so when they make a postural change, lying down to sitting up, rather than the blood pressure and the stroke volume of amount of blood kicked out of the heart in one heartbeat, making some adjustments along with heart rate so that we perfuse the brain with enough blood, an individual's heart rate goes significantly higher than normal, usually high 100s, low 200s, or higher, and in fact can be provoked into staying up like that. We now know that with a concussion and other severities of a brain injury, our autonomic nervous system that regulates heart rate in response to blood pressure, baroreceptor at the carotid artery, is dysregulated. So now what that means is, Marissa, we should be engaging in light exercise, occasionally interval training with these individuals, different exposures to postures that are more frequent but not severe, very similar to the exposure-based therapy that I described when we're talking about lights and sounds and movements and noises. There is some consideration and evidence that's building that we can rehabilitate the autonomic nervous system and connection within the brain so that we no longer experience orthostatic tachycardia when we can gradually re-expose. Keeping them completely away from movement in a lying down or supine fashion does not appear to work, but introducing movement gradually and frequently, collaborating with their opinion, does seem to work. So it needs to be a structured collaborative program, but some of the early protocols that were too light don't seem to be successful. Okay, so I don't see further questions here. Carly, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I don't have any others either. Thank you so much, Mike. That was amazing. I took a ton of notes and I'm excited. I've been sending my team pictures of some of your slides. The Coach CV one I especially like because we do try to explain that to clients, but it's hard and I like acronyms and all that. So I love that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Carly, the citation for that, I'm going to type right here.
Okay, perfect.
And I do know that the author is Creton and colleagues,
Okay.
and I believe it's 2017, but I'm not recalling off the top of my head.
Okay.
But
Okay.
you'll see that, and it actually does talk about phenotypes after concussion, and it is the Coach CV model.
Awesome. Love it. Yes, and I love how you explain everything, very easy to understand. So appreciate your time and hopefully we're going to look at having him come for Mind Matters. So hopefully that will work out.
Sounds good.
Meet you in
Thank you all
person.
for your time, and I'll
Yes,
field any questions that you guys have by email as well.
sounds great. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.